The Democrat Party has become a party that openly aids and encourages and foments violence. They've been radicalized by Democrat Party rhetoric that describes anyone who doesn't share their warped, twisted worldview as fascists, worthy, by implication, of execution. They are using this language to mark people, to put a target on them.
Stephen Miller appears there to be describing members of the right in media. He seems a bit confused. It was Matt Walsh that said that the mayor of Chicago should be executed. It was that Republican state legislator that is now saying Pramila Jayapal should be hung or possibly killed with a firing squad. It's lots of Republicans are calling for executions, but jokes aside, sarcasm aside, his narrative there is that the left is too encouraging of violence with their rhetoric. And because they do that, even though they don't, we see all this left-wing violence, which doesn't actually exist. It's a narrative that's convenient to the regime. But what's interesting is that since we just in recent weeks have seen multiple acts of right-wing political violence, Stephen Miller could perhaps check his own rhetoric a little bit, because coming out of this weekend, he's now being blamed for what looks like another bit of right-wing targeted political violence. See, he put out this tweet, okay? The day before an apparent arson attack on a judge's home. He said the issue before, I think that's supposed to be us now, is very simple and clear. There is a large and growing movement of left-wing terrorism in this country. That is not true, but if you wanted to terrify your base into committing acts of stochastic terrorism, you would want to spread that sort of myth. It is well organized and funded. It is shielded by far-left Democrat judges, prosecutors, and attorneys general. The only remedy is to use legitimate state power to dismantle terrorism and terror networks. So he is lying about the terrorism and then lying that the terrorists which don't exist are being protected by judges. And so weird that we've had such an uptick in threats against judges, which we've previously reported on the damage report. It's become incredibly common for there to be death threats against judges recently. Well, now we have this fire, which happened over the weekend. Police are investigating the cause of a fire that burned down the home of South Carolina Circuit Court Judge Diane Goodstein, who had reportedly received death threats for weeks related to her work. Goodstein was reportedly not at home at the time of the fire, but at least 3 members of her family, including her husband, former Democratic State Senator Arnold Goodstein, and their son, have been hospitalized with serious injuries. So this is very, very scary. Now there's a lot that we don't know about the fire just yet, but it is convenient considering that in just the past couple of weeks, that particular judge had been receiving these death threats after blocking the state election commission from releasing its voter files to the DOJ. So basically, the DOJ is trying to get all of these like special files from different states that would allow them to look into how elections are run on the state level, perhaps start to influence it in the future. And in this particular case, the judge was like access to that information, and the right had freaked out about that. And so we talk about them putting targets on the backs of these judges. They love to do this. Donald Trump constantly tweets about the AGs, about the judges. This was one of those. And in the wake of people pointing out that he had been encouraging radicalization against judges, in this particular case, you can put up this tweet by Representative Dan Goldman, talks about the targeting of these judges. Stephen Miller freaks out about it, calls the person vile, deeply warped, and then says that no, they're actually the ones that are fighting political violence. Meanwhile, Dan Goldman tries to get him. He didn't answer right there a question about whether Stephen Miller actually will stand against political violence on all sides and not just the fictional left-wing political violence that Stephen Miller is pushing to help the regime. Dan Goldman sends him a second tweet. Will you condemn all political violence or only that against your supporters? Which is the easiest thing to do in the world. You could do that and then go right back to spinning your fascist PR narratives. But he doesn't even respond to that. Because Stephen Miller, in addition to being like a strategist for the regime, is also an ideologue and a deeply weak person. And so he can't even bring himself to pretend to have an issue with right-wing political violence. And so we're waiting for more information about this particular fire, but I know there's a lot of judges that are already incredibly terrified of what the MAGA movement might do to them. And I imagine those fears are even stronger coming out of this weekend. Jared, what do you think?
Well, while he was fighting with Dan Goldman back and forth there about that, he then went on to also have more vitriolic statements to say about the judge that ruled against them sending troops to any state that they want, specifically in this case, Oregon. So he didn't miss a beat. As he's not answering the question about or not caring about this, seems to be arson attack from folks who are mad at this judge for her ruling. He did the same thing to someone else while he's calling other folks vile. He's like, when I want to call him a cartoon character, I don't want people to take that as like, a jokingly thing. The guy, every time someone mentions anything, it's vile, crazy, stupid, can't believe, killing. Like he's over the top. Like really, like he should be like, we should like study his brain and try and figure out how he got to this point where he's this rabid. Enough people are weak enough to listen to him rail like this and snarl every time and call other folks terrorist judges that somehow are supporting terrorist networks. With all these terrorists in the streets who are demanding things like access to healthcare, and freedom and normal things like voting rights. Those are terroristic things from fascists. If normal freedom things are terroristic things to these guys, it means that they're against those things. I'm not sure why the guy who said, anybody that's Antifa, anti-fascist is against me, people haven't finished that equation. He's calling himself a fascist.